Released after 11 years. The paperwork used more words than that, but those were the ones that mattered. Agnes Beaumont walked out of the Maryville Correctional Facility on a Tuesday morning in late April, carrying a cardboard box and wearing clothes she didn't recognize. Her sister had sent them, 2 sizes wrong, and found the county-issued car waiting to drive her to the halfway house in Knoxville. The driver didn't talk. Agnes looked out the window at the Tennessee green coming in after a late spring and thought about nothing in particular, which was something she had become very good at. She had been convicted of financial fraud. She had been guilty of some of it, the parts that were her brother Martin's, the larger parts, the parts that had built to the scale that sent someone to prison, she had taken responsibility for because Martin had asked her to, and because she had believed at the time that it would work out. It had not worked out. The halfway house was fine. The counselor there was a woman named Deshanda who didn't pretend that everything was fine, which Agnes appreciated. It was Deshanda who told her, 3 weeks in, that a letter had arrived from a lawyer. Agnes read the letter twice. Then she asked Deshanda if she could get a dog. Koda came from the county shelter, a German shepherd, 5 years old, black and tan, with a thick outer coat that shed in dense tufts and alert triangular ears that tracked sound with the precision of a radio antenna. He had been there for 4 months, which the shelter staff said was unusual for a German shepherd of his quality. Agnes thought he was waiting. He was lying across her feet when she read the letter a third time. The letter was from a lawyer in Cold Ford, Tennessee, a town Agnes had never heard of, regarding a property that had been in her father's estate and that had remained unresolved due to Agnes's incarceration and the subsequent legal complications. Her father had died during her 3rd year inside. She had not been allowed to attend the funeral. Martin had managed the estate, had managed everything, in fact, with the same practiced efficiency that had managed her into a prison sentence, and had informed Agnes, via a brief letter, that the estate had been largely consumed by debts. The property in Cold Ford had apparently been overlooked. Agnes thought about Martin the way she thought about most things now, at a careful distance, with the deliberate neutrality she'd developed over 11 years of needing to keep her emotional temperature steady. Martin was her brother, and she loved him, and he had let her take 11 years of his consequences, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and she had learned to live with both of them. The lawyer's letter said her father had owned a river cottage at Cold Ford. The property had not been included in the estate filing. It had been paying its own taxes, automatically from an account her father had set up for the past 20 years. It was currently assessed at $9,000. She read the address 3 times. Koda stood up from her feet, walked to the door of her halfway house room, and turned around and sat down and looked at her. Deshanda helped her navigate the legal requirements. Halfway house residents could travel with approval, and visiting a property you'd inherited was approvable. Agnes got her driver's license reinstated. She borrowed Deshanda's car for the drive to Cold Ford. Her father had never mentioned Cold Ford. He had not mentioned a river cottage or a separate account or any of this. He had been a quiet man, quieter in his later years than Agnes had understood at the time, and she had attributed this to age. She understood now that there might have been other reasons. She stopped at a gas station and bought a road atlas because she had learned inside that it was useful to know exactly where you were going. She spread it on the hood of Deshanda's car while Koda waited in the back seat. She found Cold Ford, a small town on the Clinch River southeast of Knoxville, an hour and a half. Koda had been quiet for the drive, lying in the back with his chin on his paws, watching the Tennessee countryside go by, until they turned onto the state road that followed the river south. Then he sat up, his ears went forward, his muzzle tracked the air through the 2-inch window gap. He made no sound. He simply sat up straighter and became more alert, and Agnes noticed this and paid attention, because in 5 weeks she had learned that Koda's attentiveness was a reliable signal. The town of Cold Ford was a gas station, a post office, a feed store, and a church. The river was green and fast and wide in late April, running high with snowmelt from the mountains. Agnes parked and looked at it for a moment. A doctor's office occupied what had been, according to the faded sign above the door, a hardware store. Agnes had not thought to call ahead. The doctor was in. He was old enough that Agnes wondered if he was the specific doctor mentioned in her father's records. The doctor who had apparently, according to the lawyer's letter, been given instructions by her father 20 years ago. She asked him. He said yes. He reached into his desk drawer and produced an envelope. For Agnes, when she's ready. The river cottage was 2 miles south of town on a dirt track that followed the river's west bank. Sycamore and cottonwood, the ground still damp from the high spring water. The river visible through the trees, running green and cold. The cottage was small, One story, stone foundation, weathered clapboard, a porch facing the water that had partially collapsed at one end. A rusted iron post by the door still had a mailbox on it, the door of the mailbox standing open. The yard was wild, river-bottom plants, fern, mayapple, the kind of growth that comes in when no one has been pulling things up. Koda was out of the car before Agnes had finished stopping. He moved along the foundation with his nose to the ground, not frantic, systematic, and stopped at the far corner, where a metal bulkhead door lay flush with the ground. A basement entrance. The door was rusted shut, the hasp sealed with an old padlock. Koda pressed his nose to the edge of the bulkhead, inhaled. His ears went rigid, both of them pointing directly forward, utterly still. He looked at Agnes over his shoulder. Then he began to dig at the edge of the bulkhead with his right front paw. Not frantically, deliberately, like a man tapping on a table to make a point. The cottage interior was one main room and a back room. Stone fireplace, cold, wide plank floors, pine, soft in places. A kitchen counter with a hand pump still installed, likely non-functional. A table with 3 chairs, mismatched. A cast iron bed frame in the back room, no mattress. On the windowsill facing the river, a coffee can, the old kind with a plastic lid, still sealed. Still sitting there as if someone had set it down and meant to come back. Agnes looked at the coffee can, looked at the window, at the river moving fast and green through the trees, looked back at the can. She didn't touch it yet. She walked the main room slowly, noting the construction. Her father had been a carpenter, a fact she hadn't thought about in years. The joinery in this room was careful. The fireplace mantel was hand-fitted stone. Someone had built this with attention. The rag rug in front of the fireplace, braided, faded, blue and brown, was centered with a precision that the rest of the room's age didn't match, as if someone had straightened it recently or had been very particular about it. Koda was at the bulkhead door again. Agnes could hear his claws on the metal from inside, on the mantel carved into the wood. Beaumont, 1953. Her family name? Carved in 1953. Agnes had been born in 1957. Agnes went back outside. Koda was still at the bulkhead, digging at the edge with the patient, measured persistence of a dog who has decided that getting through this obstacle is simply the next thing on the list. I hear you, Agnes said. She didn't have a pry bar. She had in her cardboard box of belongings a folding multi-tool that the halfway house allowed residents to carry. She went to work on the padlock hasp with the flattest blade she had. The screws were corroded but not stripped. She worked at them for 30 minutes, Koda sitting beside her once she started, his work done, now watching hers. The hasp came free, the bulkhead door was swollen into its frame. Agnes gripped the handle and pulled steadily, not forcing it, and on the third sustained pull it gave with a sound like a slow exhale. Concrete stairs going down, earthen smell, cold with something under it. Cedar, she thought. The same smell as the stone mill. People who built things to last all seemed to know about cedar. Koda went down the stairs first. He moved to the far corner of the small basement, stone walls, earthen floor, a wooden shelf on the north wall, and sat in front of the shelf. On the shelf, a tin box green with a latch, and beside it, rolled in oilcloth tied with leather cord, something cylindrical the size of a large paper towel roll. The rolled thing was the important one. Koda had his nose pressed against it. She heard footsteps on the porch above, deliberate, the footsteps of someone using the porch boards carefully, testing their reliability. Agnes called up, "I'm in the basement," a man's voice. Thought I heard someone. And then, "Take your time." When she came up, he was standing on the porch, tall, thin, somewhere in his late 70s, with the hands of someone who had done outdoor work all his life. He introduced himself as Ray Combs. He lived on the next property through the cottonwoods. He looked at Koda, who had come upstairs beside Agnes. Koda was watching Ray with his ears forward, weight balanced, making his assessment. "German Shepherd," Ray said. "Your father had a German Shepherd. Years back," he paused. "You look like him." "Your father. You knew him?" "He came down here every few months, right up until he got sick." Ray looked at the river. "He told me once. He said if anyone ever comes here, tell them to look at what the dog finds. He said he'd trained the dog to show the family a pause. That was a different dog, obviously. But I suppose the idea carries." Koda had come to stand beside Agnes. He watched Ray without aggression. "Just watch." "He told you nothing else?" Agnes said. Ray looked at her for a long moment with the careful look of a man who has held information for a long time and is deciding how much to give. "He told me," Ray said slowly, "that this land was involved in something that happened in 1953 that the county would rather forget about. He said he had the proof, and he said he'd kept it here because it was the one place he knew was safe." He looked at the river. "He said someday someone would come who had enough reason to use it." Agnes thought about 11 years. About enough reason. "What happened in 1953, she said. That, Ray said, is in the scroll. The oilcloth was tight and old, and the leather cord had dried to something close to wire. Agnes worked at the knot for 20 minutes with her multi-tool in her fingers, Koda sitting beside her at the porch table, watching with total patience. When the knot finally gave, the oilcloth unrolled to reveal a tube of heavy paper, rolled tightly, dried to a curve that wanted to stay rolled. She unrolled it against the resistance of its own memory, one edge at a time, pressing the corners flat with her palm. It was a survey map, hand-drawn detail dated 1951. It showed the river valley for 3 miles, including the Cottage property and the properties adjacent. In red ink, precise, deliberate, not faded despite 70 years, the map showed the original river channel and superimposed on it a different line showing where the river currently ran. Someone had moved the river, or rather, someone had diverted it. In 1952 and 1953, according to a series of handwritten notes in the map's margins, the county had approved a drainage and flood control project that had shifted the main channel east by approximately 200 yards. This had drained a wetland area north of Cold Ford. The drained land had been purchased in 1953 at agricultural prices by a development company. The same land, by the 1960s, had become the site of a resort community that had made several families in the county quite wealthy. The diversion had also, according to the marginal notes, been conducted without proper survey or legal notification of downstream landowners, including Agnes's father, who had owned the Cold Ford property since 1951 and whose water rights had been substantially affected. Her father had documented all of it. Koda pressed his paw onto the map's edge when Agnes's hands went still. One firm, deliberate press. Keep reading. Inside the tin box, her father's written account, 14 pages in his careful carpenter's handwriting, describing what he had witnessed, what he had recorded, and what he had chosen not to do with it during his lifetime, because the families involved were powerful and he had a daughter at home, and he had not wanted the trouble. But I kept the record, the last page said, because some things should not be lost even if they cannot be used immediately. If you are reading this, things have changed enough that maybe they can be used now, or maybe not. But you should know what happened here because it happened on your land, and it is your right to know what is yours. And at the bottom of the tin box beneath the written account, 3 sealed envelopes, one to the County Historical Society, one to the State Environmental Review Board, one to the law school clinic at the University of Tennessee, the organization, her father's note said, that handled cases involving historical land use violations. He had already addressed them. He had already written the letters. He had just not mailed them. Agnes sat with the envelopes on the porch and looked at the river moving through the cottonwoods. Koda lay down across her feet, his full weight a warm anchor, and she felt his slow breathing and did not move. She read all 14 pages. She read them slowly, the way her father had clearly written them, carefully, with attention to each word. Her father had been 42 in 1953. He had owned this land for 2 years. He had watched the county come in and move the river, and had tried quietly, through proper channels, to raise the question of water rights, and had been told, by people with more authority than him, that the matter was settled. He had not believed it was settled. He had believed that what had been done was wrong, not just to him personally, but to the record of what had happened in the valley, to the downstream families who'd lost water access, to the wetland that had been drained and sold for profit. He had believed these things, and he had been one man with a carpenter's income and a daughter, and so he had written it down and put it in a cedar-lined basement and made arrangements so that it would still be there when the world changed enough to use it. I don't know if the world has changed, the last page said. But I know you have, Agnes. Whatever brought you here, whatever you have carried, you are your own person, and this is your land, and what is in this box is yours to do with as you see fit. Koda pressed his nose against her wrist when she finished. He held it there, warm breath, damp muzzle, and then moved to press his side against her leg. She thought about 11 years of consequences she had not entirely earned. She thought about Martin. She thought about her father, who had also absorbed something without making a noise about it, and had done the most useful thing he could manage with the time he had. She was 67 years old. She was out. She had a river cottage and 14 pages of documented evidence and 3 pre-addressed envelopes. She didn't cry. That surprised her. She had cried enough inside, the first year, the third year, the year her father died, that she had thought she might have run out. She hadn't run out. She just found, sitting on the porch of her father's river cottage in the Tennessee spring, that what she felt was something quieter than crying, something closer to a long breath released. 11 years of being the one who took the consequence. And here was her father's voice from 15 years ago saying, "You are your own person." Koda moved while she was still. He stood up from across her feet and repositioned himself beside her on the porch step, pressing his flank against her arm, his warm side against hers, and stayed there. She felt the ridge of his spine against her arm. She felt him breathing. He tried, she said, not to Koda exactly. To the cottage, the river, the cottonwoods. He did what he could. Koda turned and looked at her face when she spoke, his dark eyes level and steady. Then he turned back to the river. "Yeah," Agnes said. "Me, too." The deed in the tin box beneath the envelopes was the one her father had filed in 1951. Beaumont property properly recorded. Her name was not on it, but in the letter addressed to her, her father had written, "I spoke to a lawyer in 2004. The property passes to you as my only surviving child. Martin has no claim, I made sure of that. The documentation is in the county recorder's file." She called the lawyer in cold Ford, the one who'd sent the original letter. He confirmed. The property had passed to Agnes at her father's death. He had been waiting for her to call. Martin had managed the estate. He had either not known about this property or had decided not to mention it. Either way, it was hers, the 3 envelopes, the 14 pages of her father's account, the survey map with the red ink overlay. The law school clinic number was still active. She found it on her phone. The Environmental Review Board had a public tip line. Agnes held the tin box in her lap for a moment. Koda stood up, walked the length of the porch, came back and lay down at her feet. He exhaled. His tail swept the porch boards once. Ray came back in the late afternoon with a thermos of coffee and 2 cups and sat on the porch with Agnes while the river went gold in the declining light. Agnes had mailed 2 of the 3 envelopes at the Cold Fort post office, the one to the Historical Society and the one to the Environmental Review Board. The law school envelope she was holding, she wanted to read it first fully before she sent it. She wanted to understand what she was starting. On the mantel in the cottage, she had looked at it again on her way out, the carved letters, Beaumont 1953. Her father had carved his family name in the year the county moved the river, and he'd started writing things down. He had chosen to stay, to keep the land, to keep the record, to trust that eventually someone would come who would know what to do with it. The vetch growing up through the collapsed end of the porch had small purple flowers just opening. Agnes had not noticed them on the way in. She noticed them now. Koda was at the river's edge, as close as the bank allowed, standing still looking at the water. His ears were relaxed, his tail made slow, easy movements. He looked, Agnes thought, like a dog who has been carrying something heavy and has set it down. "Will you be coming back?" Ray asked. Agnes looked at the river, at the sycamores. At the carved name on the mantel she could see through the window. "Yes," she said, released after 11 years. They'd given her a cardboard box and a car ride and a room at a halfway house, and they had not given her a father's river cottage or a cedar-lined basement or 14 pages of documented evidence that someone had been waiting to hand her. Koda had found the basement door within minutes of arrival, had dug at its edge with calm, deliberate insistence until Agnes went looking for a tool, and had sat beside her the entire time she worked the screws, and had gone down the stairs first and gone directly to the rolled oilcloth and pressed his nose against it and waited. When Agnes's hands had gone still on the 14 pages, Koda had pressed his nose against her wrist and held it there. When she said, "He did what he could." He had looked at her face and then turned back to the river. What is hidden in the ground does not disappear. It waits for someone brave enough to dig. Agnes Beaumont was 67 years old. She had a river cottage and a survey map and a German shepherd, and she was, for the first time in 11 years, beginning to understand what the next thing was going to be.